This coconut porter that I'm making calls for a pound of shredded coconut, which comes with the kit, but it says you should toast it in the oven until you get a golden brown consistency. I chose not to put it in the oven because it's very hard to stir. So I put it in a fry pan here, and I'm stirring it as I cook it. So this is what it looks like after it's toasted. It smells very nice. This whole pound of coconut, thank you Gus, is going into the fermenter when I move it all to secondary fermentation, which will be the next step. One of the most important things you can do to have a successful batch of beer is to sanitize everything that the beer will touch. So what I'm doing right now is I have a gallon of sanitizer I've just made here. This is the product I made it from, Star San. 6 milliliters per gallon, so this will last a long time. I've got my handy dandy siphoner here, and I'm going to get a siphon going. So now the sanitizer is going through this piece of tubing down into my secondary fermentation container. So I'm just going to rinse the sides of this thing with the sanitizer. That's all it really needs is a contact. It doesn't need to soak or anything, just contact it. This is also what I'm going to use to transfer the wort from the primary fermenter into the secondary fermenter. So I'm doing double duty here by sanitizing the tubing, the siphoner. So next we're going to go into, we're going to siphon from the primary into the secondary fermentation container. Removing the fermentation lock, taking the lid from the primary fermenter. If you can shoot down in here a little bit, inside the bucket. Okay, good. So I'm going to start the siphon to go from the primary into the secondary fermenter. There she goes. So at this point, you don't want to aerate the wort any more than necessary. So I'm trying to stick the tubing down underneath the surface, because at this point in the process, oxygen is not your friend anymore. Oxygen is your enemy. So what we're trying to do here is eliminate as much oxygen as possible as we do this transfer. So I'm just going to hold this under the surface for a little bit here till it gets deep enough, and then I'll let go of it. Smallish plate here. I'm going to tip the brew bucket and put the plate underneath there. That tilts the bucket so that the siphoner will get as much of the wort as possible out of here and into the secondary fermenter. This container that we're filling right now is called a Big Mouth Bubbler. It's used mostly for secondary fermentation. It's called the Big Mouth Bubbler because it has a big mouth on it. This is what's left over in the primary fermentation bucket after I removed all of the wort. What you see down at the bottom there is mostly yeast. Probably a ½ inch layer of yeast that's down in there. So here's our bowl of toasted coconut. This is going right in the wort here. Hopefully I can do this without spilling all over, which is what I usually do, because you can't make a batch of beer without spilling a bunch of stuff. the lid for the Big Mouth Bubbler. And then next, is this little piece here, which has a hole in the top for the fermentation lock, which is now installed. Now we let that sit for another 2 weeks. I'll come back and swirl it every once in a while to make sure all that coconut is in contact with the wort. And then in about 2 weeks' time, we'll be able to keg this and drink it. Okay, this coconut porter, as you can see here, has about 1.5 inches of coconut floating in the wort. About every day or so, I like to stir this up just so that the coconut flavor gets saturated in the whole 5-gallon volume. And it's kind of cool to watch this stuff go. So I'm just going to swirl it up here. And there it is. That'll all come back up to the top again in a few hours. The last week or so of the 2-week time it's in secondary fermentation, I won't stir it, because part of the reason you do secondary fermentation is to get the yeast and other solids to fall to the bottom.